What's up, YouTube? It's Joe Ketchapalia sitting on the couch, making some money investing in fractional real estate online. Today, I want to dive into a topic that's been thrown around quite a bit on Lofty's Discord, which is fraud. It's something that I will probably never openly accuse anyone of because, one, it's just not my place to do it, right? I mean, it's if we're at some point going to try to file suit or turn someone in, I mean, that's the time to actually start using that, using that accusation. But other than that, I think it's also often the case. It's virtually impossible to discern from the outside without a whole lot of knowledge whether someone's just completely incompetent and negligent or if they're actually committing fraud intentionally. Yeah, it's something that, after the fact, I think it's always a lot easier to figure out. But when you are the counterparty, it's often very difficult in certain situations. It's, and unfortunately, I have a lot of experience in this, part of the real estate industry. I think if you're in real estate investing long enough, it's unavoidable. You're going to either be, a potential victim. You're going to have clients that were victims of it. You're gonna run into it in some way. Maybe you run into some fraudsters and you don't get caught, right? But so I want to talk a little bit about. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I think are like just really telltale signs. Not any one of them are going to be, okay, this is really clearly, somebody trying to defraud me or take advantage of me. But I think when you start adding them all up, so it becomes really obvious. And so one of the things, in the most recent situation going on over there in the Discord on Lofty is, and I just am not trying to, make it as public as off. So if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Um, is that there were a number of us who've been in the industry for a while who I think caught on significantly quicker than the average, and some of us even tried to alert people at Lofty, or at least ask some questions, try to point some irregularities out, and for the most part got a lot of arguing back and a lot of no, this is just how it is, and don't worry about it, and that sort of thing. Some of us more than others, and I think that a big part of it is, I think to anybody who has been around for a while, it was just a lot more obvious. But when somebody is good at, um, talking, if somebody talks a good game but just isn't able to, actually perform. Um, it's easy for someone who's a little bit less experienced to fall for the fast talk and to think of it. So anyway, like I said, I have way more experience with this than I want to. My second job, I don't know if you remember this TV show American Greed. My second job in commercial real estate, my employer ended up on American Greed. I worked at this company. I actually worked at Bluestone Real Estate Capital, but it was owned by the same, a lot of the same owners as Remington Financial Group. They were trying to like separate themselves out, but we shared all the same offices. Uh, some people worked for both, right? They get paid for both sides. And, I was there for less than 6 months. I was fairly new to real estate. I had only, I had had my license for a couple of years at that point, but hadn't really done a whole bunch with it. I had worked at one other public REIT, but really only had, financial analysis experience. And so didn't have the lending experience, didn't have a lot of understanding about um, the business. So it took me about 6 months of working there before I realized, like, oh, there's definitely something wrong going on. And I wasn't sure enough then to, I probably should have been a whistleblower. I wasn't. I didn't turn anyone in. I just left the company. Uh, abruptly, like one day, just was like, oh, one more thing happened. I was just too uncomfortable with what was going on. I just left. Um, didn't get a last paycheck or anything. I mean, and within months, the company's offices were actually raided by the FBI. The guy who had done my entrance interview into the company went to jail. Other people went to jail. Um, And so seeing, being around a lot of those people and seeing how they operate, uh, in retrospect now, when I'm around somebody that is either that is defrauding somebody, I get a lot of the same feelings, and I see a lot of the same things, um, and so that's some of the stuff I'm going to go over. I also, so that was my first experience with it, and a pretty major one. I've run into it a number of other times. The other really big one, and the one that if you go back and watch my really early YouTube videos, I built a shipping container home. I think I started it in 2020. Might have even started it in 2019, actually, because I think COVID like interrupted it. But I'm not. I don't remember 100%. I think that's true, but I'm not sure. But this is one where it took me a long time to be sure that they were just defrauding me. I thought they were, I just had hired somebody that was completely incompetent. And it was it's a situation where I got a quote for a certain amount. It ended up taking me, to finish the construction, cost me three times as much as what I was originally quoted. Uh, the original contractor disappeared partway through. And like somebody else on his staff like took over, but then they were doing the same exact thing. It was, just a really big mess. They had shown me all these properties that they said they had done before, and it turned out other people had built those. So like they hadn't even ever done these, which was mind blowing. But anyway, so that was probably a much more recent one and one that cost me. I actually somehow managed to get out of that deal without losing money. Um, I sold it for exactly what I had into it, so, you know, got out not too hurt, and I did it with owner financing, so I'm getting not the best rate. So I am, I'm having some opportunity cost expense to it, but overall, it wasn't terrible. But yeah, it ended up being a $266,000 no, I got it, like a $296,000 project or something like that. Um, And originally they were like, "Oh no, no, it's containers, and you own the land, and we're going to be able to do it for 100K." Is what they originally quoted me. And in retrospect, yeah, I think that the 300 is way too high, obviously, and there was a bunch of issues, but the 100K should have been throwing up some red flags, but they sounded really good, and this was you know my first time building something like this, and the whole industry is like, oh, it's cost effective and whatnot. So it seemed believable to me, but I was definitely a sucker there. But so over time, I've become less of a sucker and been, getting a little bit better at identifying, when there were issues. And so really, it only took me a couple of interactions with Yom to decide that I wasn't gonna invest in any of those properties, right? And it doesn't necessarily, again, like I'm not saying that this is fraud, right? It still could just be a case of incompetence. I think that's perfectly possible. Like, and as more and more stuff is coming to light, I think there's just terrible record keeping, a lot of just a lot of inexperience. And then, we'll find out at the end of the day if there was actually some fraud behind it as well. And I think that we'll figure that out once all the numbers get cleared up, and whether or not there's a willingness to pay out what is actually owed to the DAOs or not, right? But so, with some of the interactions I had on this one, this is the Wild Olive property that was converted to a STR, and there was some $50,000 worth of furniture put in. And honestly, I've worked with a lot of clients that have furnished these because we sell a bunch of STRs here, and it's not an unreasonable amount of money to spend. But it's always weird when you get a round number, and there weren't any receipts, and to this day, I don't believe, excuse me, there have been any receipts provided. Excuse me. So, that was like one of the first things, and just the way things were answered on there were suspect to me. And then the same thing, I had actually owned some of this Garfield property, that I just bought because it was crazy cheap tokens. And then he came in and took it over and provided some pictures and then just said, hey, we're going to get estimates. And, had some just interactions on there that I just, they never felt right. And so I'm going to try to go through a couple of things that I think are, that are similar in all of these situations and in many others, just because I think it's better if we all kind of have a good understanding of the types of things to look out for. And so one of the things that I think all of them have is they always claim to have like a system or a method or some secret to be able to do things in a way that the rest of the market can't. Like for the Remington Financial Group, that was the place to go to if you couldn't finance your deal anywhere else. Well, it turns out you couldn't finance your deal there either. Um, but they charge you to find that out, right? That was part of what went on there. Um, they almost always claim if it has anything to do with construction that, oh, I can get it done cheaper. I can, I'll do a better job negotiating for you, or I know a guy who's going to do this. And that's almost always, that's a claim that we hear all the time, and it's just almost never true, right? Like it's not something that a professional will tell you, right? If I'm in this business, I'm doing this regularly, I'm not going to claim I'm cheaper than everybody else because professionals aren't typically cheaper, right? If you have someone who's doing it the right way, getting it done on time, is reliable, you're going to pay a fair amount for that. It's not always going to be cheap. And so whenever you hear people like, oh, especially if it's significantly lower, I'm always a little bit worried about it. Now, sometimes you'll have someone that there's certainly times that you can get things done cheaper, right? Like, but it is if it's just something like, anytime a quote is provided, somebody will look at it for 5 seconds and be like, I can do it cheaper than that without actually digging into it and understanding what they're doing. That's usually a huge red flag for me. One of the things that I think is a really common one, and it's kind of funny to see, these people, they always claim that they're an expert, right? Like, oh, nobody's going to be able to do this better than me. I've been doing this. I know how to do it. And then as soon as there's a problem, they're like, well, I'm just learning here. This is a new situation, right? Like, so they won't say they're not an expert, but they'll say they're still learning, which is like, even though they claim to have all this experience. I've been doing this a very long time. Oh, but this situation is different. This is something we're all learning. We're trying to figure it out. I ran into that a lot on the container home property. Um, I'd see it all the time on the when I worked at Bluestone. It was just um, they'd talk about like this. Oh, it's a very different deal, right? Like it's a different, a different something. We're doing something different here, or whatever it is. But so it's a strange, clash of, oh, I'm an expert, but oh, I keep running into these situations I've never seen before, right? And so that doesn't really happen, right? Like if you're an expert in a field, sometimes you're going to be surprised, but it shouldn't happen pretty regularly, right? So that's one that I think is a little, when you see that, it should really that was one thing that came across on the call that we had, and that just seemed that was. I mean, I had already decided long before that I wasn't investing in any of those properties, and then I opposed the votes when some of mine were voted to be managed by that. But I mean, that to me is a red flag. Like how can you have those two claims, right? Like, oh, but it was like, oh, well, I'm learning about how to do it on Lofty, but it's like, well, it's a lot of this stuff is stuff that you should have been doing anytime you've had partners and managed money, right? Um, One of the biggest ones for me is they rarely answer questions directly, and then especially that's especially true when it's regarding specific numbers, right? And so you'll often get referred to the system or referred to, oh, do you remember this other deal? This other thing happened. It's going to be like that. Or you get, just you very rarely get direct answers. Sometimes you'll get a question in response to your answer, or like, yeah, well, why do you need to know that? What's the concern there? So a lot of times, and then especially like if you're asking for numbers, it'll be like, oh, well, I'm going to have to check on that. But then you never get that follow up, right? And that's something that I think I've just run into repeatedly, and so it was one of the reasons that I was a little worried about investing in a lot of these deals. Um, I mean, that happened. It was like, I thought, really egregious on this one. We supposedly had estimates in hand, but they weren't being shared with us, right? Uh, they like to hide details because they're the expert, they're going to handle it, right? Like that's another one that I've just seen over and over again, and was a similarity to this situation. And so, again, why to me, it was pretty easy really early on to not want to get involved. um Another one that is just really common is, they're saying, like, people that just want to say, "Oh, I'm not doing this for the money. I'm not concerned about the money." Like at Remington, you'd always hear them say, "Oh, this isn't about this deal. It's not about this money. We're trying to build a relationship for the future." And that's a tough one because I think it's important. Like the way I run my real estate business, in my real estate agent business, I have some agents that work for me here in San Antonio. Uh, I always tell them, we shouldn't care about this deal. We should treat them in such a way that they're going to keep coming back to us for every deal, right? I mean, that's what I think the right answer is. But it's one thing to run your business that way. It's another thing to constantly say that to people, right? Like my actions should show that, but I literally never say that. Well, there may have been times where I've mentioned it, but it's definitely not something that I will, that's not something that I'm trying to tell clients all the time. They should pick it up from the way we behave, right? And I hesitate because I've thought about, I have said that to clients, but it's usually when we're backing out of a deal and a client will be like, "I'm sorry," if they start to apologize is when I will give them that talk, right? Like, no, 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 you don't have to worry. Let's back out of this. This isn't, I don't care about this one. But that's in an earnest moment where I let them know, like, I'd like this to be an ongoing thing. Like, if this one doesn't work, it's okay. But it shouldn't be something that I'm using as a selling point up front, right? Like, I'm like, because let's just be honest, we all care about the money, right? We're investing in real estate, we're in the real estate industry because we're trying to make a living. It's just really disingenuous. And so, so it's one thing to focus on that long-term relationship. It's another thing to just tell people that's all you're trying to do and you really don't care about the money. I think that's something that I heard over and over again, with this group and when I was working on the container home. Although they didn't care about the money, but they always needed me to pay them more than what we had agreed to. So, um, and yeah, I mean, this one definitely paints me in a terrible light as far as, I did get it done. I didn't really lose money. I never ended up suing anybody because they all disappeared. Um, and like literally, like I have no, and I don't believe that there's any way that I'll ever collect from them. So I don't think it's necessarily worth it. Now, if I ever hear that one of them wins the lottery, maybe things will change. But that's one of the sad things is sometimes, and that's one of the things I'm hopeful is not the situation here, but it will we'll find out eventually. Is that a lot of times, that money's gone, even if it wasn't fraud, even if it was just negligence or incompetence. A lot of times that money is still spent and it's not available anymore, right? And so, there's a lot of discussion right now about like what's the right thing to do and what we deserve. But at a certain point, we need to be pragmatic and be like, okay, what can we reasonably expect to get in this situation as well? What else have we got here? Oh, very quick to want to partner, right? Like these guys just wanted me to be like wanted me to be involved in like all these other projects right away that were just that made no sense to me, and I wanted to get this one done and have it work perfectly, right? And I wanted to see, okay, once this is done, then we'll talk about the next one. They wanted to talk about three more projects while this was going, right? Same thing here, they always, well, one, like, I got hired way too easy. That should have been a red flag for the quality of the company they were claiming to be. Um, you know, in this situation, I don't know that there was necessarily a partnership claim, but they ended up taking over like over a third of the properties on Lofty's platform, right? So in a way, I have to imagine Lofty thought of them as a partner in some sense. I have heard rumblings that maybe they had some the Yom had some equity in Lofty. I don't know if that's true. or if that's just like a rumor that's being passed around. But that's something that I heard, and I thought, oh, that's kind of weird, but also like maybe not completely unbelievable, right? If because it seemed really strange to me that they were like one that it wasn't obvious to them, right? Like that they didn't realize like, oh, we shouldn't let this spread on our platform because it's going to cause problems. But two, that they did encourage it, right? Like in multiple times, they sent emails out to different DAOs saying, hey, you're stuck in this situation. If you switch to Yom, they could take care of it for you. Like that was it seemed strange to me, but so it made me wonder, like, was there some partnership there that we didn't know about? It doesn't sound like there really is, but maybe he had some equity. I really don't know. So don't that's just something somebody posted in the Discord. People can write whatever they want in there. I don't know if it's true. It sounded to me like, hey, maybe that could be a true thing. Um, the other thing that in all of these situations, you'd have people that would just talk about, oh, I've done this a bunch. I've got a proven track record. You can look at what I've done. And then they always have like one or two deals that they can point to that looks anything like your deal. A lot of times it's something that they haven't even finished yet. That on this one with my container home, I just was like, they pointed to some projects that weren't even their projects or ones that they had like a minor role in. The same thing for um the guys at this company. I would just hear them talk about like the same three deals all the time because they were like the big deals that they had actually closed because they did they did some business, just enough, I think, to seem legitimate for a long period of time. Um, yeah, I mean, this was wild. This was, for that to be one of my first experiences in the industry, I think, is what, it led me to question everyone, not really trust people. And it's kept me out of a lot of trouble, I think, over the years. But so, yeah, that's, you know, claiming to have that big track record, but like only really having one to two things to point to, um, is, that's problematic, right? Like if I've done a whole bunch of something, I should be able to say more than one or two that I've ever done. I think sometimes it's a little bit different, like if you're like, some people don't want to share their personal investment deals, right? Like I don't like talking a lot. I've shared I talk about my container home a lot because it's one of my biggest failures in my mind. And when I was doing it, I was videoing a lot of it, and it was a lot of fun. But I'm not going to share every deal that I do because one, I think the first step in asset protection is anonymity, right? That's not a word I'm good at saying, but remaining anonymous, not letting people know everything that you own, is a good way to protect your assets, right? So, I think it's one thing to not have like a million examples of deals that you've done. If you like, for certain things, there's like two or three deals that I talk about in my own personal investing quite a bit, but I'm not going to talk about every single one because I don't want that to be shared. But like if I'm providing a service and I can only point to one or two, but I'm claiming to have like a long track record, I think that's worrisome. And then one of the really big things is, and this is another one that's tough to tell, but like they sell the vision of what we're doing, and so like one of the things that's been hilarious to me on the Discord is people keep talking about like, feeding the cow, drinking the milk, but we don't kill the cow, right? Like you got to keep the cow alive to get the milk. Like this is just was repeated by Yom all over the place. Like, and it's like, okay, it's a good mental picture, but it's like that's not a plan, right? Like, okay, so what are the details, right? Like there's supposedly this system isn't outlined anywhere, right? Like we don't know what happens in this situation or that situation. But the vision of like, okay, no, this is long term and we're turning these properties around. Like there's a lot of discussion about like what's going to happen and what it's going to look like. But we were, whenever we'd ask about like details, we'd get close to nothing. So, again, I mean, that's why those were all the things that to me were red flags, and why very quickly it was pretty easy to say, okay, I'm not going to invest in those. Now, again, I'm not saying just because there's all those similarities that this is necessarily a case of fraud. Like I think that this could just be just incompetence, just negligence, just a matter of doing no bookkeeping and having not a lot of experience and screwing a lot of things up and making a lot of decisions without asking us the way that they should have been. Um, So I really just never want to be in a spot where I'm accusing someone of that until there's like really solid evidence of it. I think when everything gets cleared up and we know exactly what the number is that's going to be owed to the DAOs, it'll be really telling, right? Because if at that moment there's no payment made, right, that money's not handed over, the deeds aren't given back, there's not once an actual solution is worked out as far as like what each one owes, um, if in that, I think in that instance is when we'll all find out what really happened here, right? Like which case we're in. And so I just wanted to mention all of those things so that we'd have, because I think that they're all reasons that, things that we should all be aware of. And it's tough because a lot of them are ones that are used by good salespeople. But I think there's a fine line between someone who's a good salesperson. Like I think any one of them, it just takes their intentions to shift a little bit. If you're good at selling stuff, you could be good at committing fraud, right? Um, I'm going to also go into what I think the solutions are to this, like how we can prevent this, not just on Lofty, but on other platforms as well, like with some of the things that we can ask for and demand, as far as like for a platform that we want to use. Which reminds me, please like and subscribe. And also in the description to this video, there's a link to our Discord. So you're welcome to join the Discord that I have set up and talk to me and about 60 other investors about fractional real estate investing. It's not a sales funnel. It is, I'm trying to create a community for us to, yes, for my benefit as well, but for all of us to benefit by getting this industry better. And it seems to be going pretty well. I think that we've provided a unified front on some issues. Also, in the links in the video description are links to all of the platforms I'm currently invested on. Yeah, I'd love it if everybody invested on all the same ones that I did because it gives us a little bit more say, and we can all make the same complaints or requests on those platforms. But you want to do your own due diligence. Just because I invest in a platform doesn't mean that you should. There's one that I'm invested on Collab, but I definitely don't recommend it. I've been pretty happy with Mogul, although I had my first experience with them that I'm slightly disappointed in, but I don't have all the details yet, so I'm not gonna go into that just yet. Lofty has been really a lot of disappointments, but then there's also just a ton of opportunity, and so I think that it's worth it to stick around. And I think that if a bunch of us work together, we can sort of push things in the right direction. And I think this is how we do it, right? So this is what I think the solution is. What keeps this from happening too often is I think that we need to demand that DAOs and operators of DAOs, whether it's a co-owner or a manager, we just need to demand a higher level of transparency. I think, one of the things Lofty always talks about is, well, we're just a platform, right? We're not in the business of managing these properties, and we don't want to tell the owners how to run their properties. And I think those are two legitimate positions to take, but I don't think that precludes them from saying, but to list on our platform, these are our minimum reporting standards, right? And I think, at a minimum, they should have to provide, copies of all invoices from vendors, right, on a monthly basis. Provide P&Ls on a monthly basis. Like this is not rocket science. This is stuff I've gotten from every property manager I've ever had. Um, Provide, mortgage statements showing that the mortgage is paid if the co-owner is responsible for a mortgage. Like all these things are simple and they should have them. And I'd really like them to also provide bank statements. There's been some pushback on that one because, there is, like, okay, not everybody has their bank set up the same way. Some of them are commingling funds from a bunch of different properties. And I think the real answer to that is that's not actually acceptable, right? Like that shouldn't be an acceptable way to run your business if you're selling, if you have individual DAOs that are, owed that money, right? Now, I think if it's a third party PM, it's a little bit different, right? Like if they're holding um, funds in an escrow account, for example, they have certain state requirements that they're required, to keep your money in a certain way. And so it makes me much less worried about that. It's more so, if it's a co-owner, like it's not a big deal to set up an actual bank account or even a virtual bank account for each DAO. and then to or it's not really a virtual bank account, but like a separate account within the same bank for each DAO is not a big deal to do, and it's a pretty uh to have that be a requirement to list on here, I think is should be a no-brainer, right? And so that somebody who owns a piece of this property can look into that Dropbox every single month and see, okay, the mortgage has been paid, the expenses that we see here are all the receipts from vendors, and we know we paid them, and this is what they were, and we can check into them. Like that level of transparency. And like if you look in Earl's drop boxes, he's already doing this, and this is where I think he's really the gold standard for transparency at the moment. Alec has agreed to match that same level, and he's going to try to go shoot for the same reporting. I really think it should just be a requirement. It's not. Otherwise there's just like too many. Those are all simple things to do, and if you're not doing those things, there's too many opportunities, even if you're not trying to defraud someone, to just like, if you're not keeping that level of records, then how do you know that you have the money available that you should, and that you're not spending it somewhere else that you're not supposed to. But I think that one requirement alone, like if that were required, it would deter the vast majority of grifters, right? Like, it's really hard. You'd have to you It deters everybody except for someone who's just willing to generate false documents for everything. And those people exist, and those are obviously really hard to weed out. Um, I think once all the legacy properties are spoken for on Lofty, most of the uh, PM changing property managers will have less problems with this. So it will really just be co-owner requirements, right? Like in order to bring a property to the platform, you have to commit to those things. And so I think that that's pretty simple to do. I would say, this type of reporting, I think we should ask for it from all of the platforms, right? I mean, I think some of them, if it's like a company like Mogul, where it's that company is doing, they're providing more of a service, right, where they are bringing the properties and everything, and they're overseeing the property managers. I think that there's a little bit less, I think there's probably a little hesitancy to give too much info away, because they might be sharing their competitive advantage with other people who are trying to do the same thing. But at the same time, we're owners in those properties, and so I want to be able to verify certain things that I want to know the mortgage has been paid. I want to know that the vendors that we're paying are legitimate companies out there in the world for different things, like all that sort of thing. Like I'd like to see, and so it's something I think not. I think on Lofty it's needed more than anywhere else at the moment, because you have all these different co-owners, and they have wildly different reporting standards that they're using currently, or reporting methods. They're not, some of them check into the Discord every 6 months and say, oh, let me upload that, I didn't think about it. And some of them are great, and are giving us stuff on a regular basis. And I always mention Earl. He's not the only one that's doing a good job on here, but I think I like his the most, right? I think he's providing the absolute most detail out of everybody, and I would just like to see that become what everybody has to do, right? And so then the other thing, like I was starting to say on Lofty, once we're done with the legacy properties, then the only like real new grifters that can come around, I mean, unless we start to, get other people trying to take over properties that somebody else already has. I mean, I feel pretty good about Earl and Alec, and I don't know M1 or Josh at all, really. I haven't interacted with him much, but he also strikes me so far. And I think I own one or two that he took over. Uh, he's the one that I still haven't made it, quite a decision on yet. But like, I've read his book. I like the way he talks. I think that his thought process is good. Um, we'll just have to see how he's how he actually does as a manager, sharing info with us, right? I just don't know. I don't, um, but provided that those three work out, then I think that's the vast majority of the legacy properties are going to be spoken for, and they might pick up more and more, and then that issue will be gone. but we'll still have the issue with new co-ownership properties being brought on, because there's just as much, potential for grift there, maybe even more so. And I think one of the things that, as much as Lofty really doesn't seem to want to do this, they should have someone who understands real estate investing on their team. And I mean, like, really understands it, can look at a deal that's brought to the platform and understand this is actually a good deal versus, um, this is, they're doing this and this and this to make it look like it is, but it's really going to be a problem, down the road. And it's not as if I think, and I know they don't want to make judgments on what is, um, what investment someone should make, and I think that's perfectly fair. But again, you can do it in a manner of, okay, we're just not going to let you bring it to the platform with puffed up numbers or projections that are inflated in a certain way, right? Like you're going to have to, forcing properties to come to the market with really full transparency on how they're operating at the moment, and the likelihood of, if they're going to provide projections, which they all do, it should be really, um, with numbers that are backed up a little bit more than what we get at the moment. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think it's really just necessary. Like, even, just having somebody like that on their staff, like that can look at deals, understand if that deal makes sense, talk to the co-owner, get a sense pretty quickly of, is this somebody who is just, coming here to really take advantage of the platform or not. Like I said, I mean, I think it's absolutely shocking that a third of the properties on their platform, were managed by Yom at one point in time, and this didn't like just concern them to no end. Like they had like this broad, like, I think that it actually could have been an existential risk for the platform. I think there was like a real potential, if that kept growing and before things really started to fall apart. Yeah, I mean, it could have gone much worse. It seems like at this point, things are going to get worked out. Everything's going to get dug out, and if his intentions are in fact good, then, the money will get handed over where it should be. Once we work through the numbers, and I say we, it's not me. It's mostly Earl and Alec and Josh that are going to have to deal with that. And it seems like Lofty's involved a little bit as well at this point, which is good. Um, but understanding that that was a risk and that was happening on their platform, like I don't know, it seems to me like they were blindsided, especially because like right up until everything fell apart, there seemed to be a lot of support from the operations department to be like, hey, you could always just go over there, if whatever you're doing here is not working. So anyway, I think that's all I want to say about that. I think, and so I have two questions, right? And things that if you don't mind putting your thoughts either in the comments or jumping in the Discord mentioning. One, are there other like really clear signs of fraud that you can think of, that you've seen that I didn't include on my list? Because this is certainly not an exhaustive list. It's just ones that I think that when I think of those three situations that I was talking about, I basically see the same thing in all three. So that's one. Any telltale signs of fraud that you like to? Oh, the other one, that I think is a really good one is, when too many round numbers, or especially in returns, like if you're showing like, uh, the same exact return, over time. Um, that almost never happens with anything other than triple net properties. That was something that like Bernie Madoff's company was famous for. Like, it's, oh, we just always make 12% or whatever the number was, and that should have really created a lot of, red flags for people. And now I think people understand that that's more of a problem. So anyway, other ones like that, I'd love to hear. The other thing is, do you think there are other solutions to help, to keep it so that as we're investing on different, fractional real estate platforms, that we can avoid these issues, right? Like, are there, other things that we could get together and ask platforms to do, or things that we can do as investors to dig into co-owners and property managers ourselves that are somewhat simple. Like I'm always doing due diligence videos on the properties, um, but I don't really do a whole lot of work on the managers themselves, depending on what platform I'm talking about. And maybe that's something I really need to add. One of the reasons that I think I'm not as worried about that is because, as long as the property's still there, we can change the manager. But, as we've seen, changing the manager can be a real pain if that manager has sloppy books, doesn't have good details about, what's owed and, so it can be a problem. But so any other thoughts on things that we should be looking for and asking for um, from all the different platforms in order to help protect us a little bit more as investors? I think that's really everything. But yeah, if you don't mind either putting that in the comments or jumping in the Discord and talking about it, um, it's something I think that I was honestly surprised at how many people didn't see a problem sooner, and even more so how many people like got mad at me for asking questions, right? Like I got a lot of pushback for asking some pretty simple questions early on. I think that hopefully this has been a lesson for everybody that why transparency is so important, why it's important that us as owners of these properties should be entitled to all the information that anybody has. um because otherwise there's just way too much opportunity for us to just lose money in ways that we just never would have expected. And I don't know if this American Greed show is still going on, but if not, maybe it would be cool if we got an episode of it eventually. Who knows? Who knows? That would be crazy to me if there was a second one that I had like a close tie to. It would make me worry a lot about my judgment. But definitely when I went to work for that company, when I really, knowing what I know now, it would have been obvious, right? It was, like I said, it was my second job in commercial real estate. Um, and I just, one of my problems is I've always been too much of an optimist. And I think that optimists are the easiest to take advantage of, right? Like we can just see the good outcomes and often, don't think about all the ways something that could go wrong. One of the things, I guess that's one thing that you can do is find a partner who is good at identifying problems. And so, like I've been married for almost 20 years now. I guess it'll be 19 years this November. But she's really good at figuring out what we should worry about, right? And I say so like that's who I run a lot of stuff by. And also just two, I think going to law school made me much more of a person that looked for problems versus just being too optimistic. But I still am definitely, somebody who falls for the uh selling the dream and not, and being light on the details. It was only 5 years ago I built a shipping container home, right? Like who does that? That's not uh you have to be an optimist to do that, right? Is like your first own personal ground up home build to be something that, and not just one container. I don't know if I mentioned that. It was four containers. Uh Ended up being like a 1,400 square foot home on a slope with drainage problems, 77 trees on the lot, and that we had to build around, and we did a funny configuration. But anyway, yeah, had to be an optimist to do something like that. I think it can be great in business, but it does open you up to being somebody who's taken advantage of more often. And so, coming up with these little tools and like ways of looking for these issues, like I do always want to give people the benefit of the doubt, but as soon, which is why I have to have like, okay, these are things I look for. And if they do these things, um, I might not turn them into the authorities immediately, but it lets me know like, hey, this is not somebody I want to deal with. If they're trying to take over my properties, I'm going to vote against it. If they already run something I'm involved in, I mean, like all that sort of thing. But anyway, I think that I've talked long enough about this. Please do share your thoughts because I'm super interested in what other people think. And one more thing, I think a lot of other people did start to have this feeling earlier than they started to say anything about it. And how do we normalize like talking about that early and often when we get a sense that like maybe something wrong is going on, right? Like I never want to be in a spot where I'm accusing somebody of wrongdoing. Um, but I do think that we should have an environment where it's everybody's open for us to ask the questions to get to the bottom of any individual situation. And there shouldn't be pushback for asking for details on something for properties that we're technically owners of. So anyway, that's it for me for today. Until next time, oh, tickle the like button. Until next time, I'm going to keep making mistakes. And so you see now, I have made some big ones. I'm going to keep making mistakes so that you don't have to.